What's up YouTube, Saf here on Super Saf TV, and in this video I'm going to be comparing the specs and features of the Apple iPad Air 2 to the iPad Mini 3. So both of these devices were announced today at the Apple event, and initially I wasn't actually going to do this video because last year we had the iPad Mini 2 as well as the iPad Air, and the Mini 2 was pretty much just a smaller version of the iPad Air. Very similar specs pretty much overall. It was just a smaller, more compact size. This is not actually the case this year. I mean, Apple quietly announced the iPad Mini 3. It didn't really spend too much time in the presentation. It was only a slide and a few seconds that they talked about it. And I would have generally assumed that it would be the same case as last year. The iPad Mini 3 would just be a smaller version of the iPad Air 2. This is definitely not the case. So what are the key differences between these two devices? Do hit that thumbs up button and let's find out. And so starting off with the size difference, the iPad Mini 3 is exactly the same size as the iPad Mini 2. So it's got the same design and same build, same size. So the height, the width, the depth is all exactly the same as the iPad Mini 2. So it is practically going to look exactly the same. Now, in terms of the size difference compared to the iPad Air 2, you're looking at roughly about 40mm smaller in terms of height, and also 34.8mm smaller in terms of width. So it is definitely more compact in terms of the height and the width. The one thing that the iPad Air 2 does have is that it's just 6.1mm thin, so that makes the iPad Mini 3 roughly about 1.4mm thicker. Now 6.1mm on a tablet is absolutely insane. That's the thinnest tablet in the world right now. And the fact that they've got it down to this size is very, very impressive. Yes, people are going to be talking about bend gate and that it might bend, but it's a tablet, so you're not going to be putting it in your pocket or anything, so that's very unlikely to happen. Now the difference in the dimensions is because of the screen size. You've got a 9.7-inch screen on the iPad Air 2. On the Mini 3, you've got a 7.9-inch screen, so a smaller screen size. So at the expense of the larger size, you are getting that much more screen real estate. So in terms of your media consumption and things, the iPad Air 2 is definitely going to be more beneficial here. And especially if you've got something like an iPhone 6 Plus, which is already quite large, instead of just going a little bit larger in terms of the screen, the iPad Air 2 is probably going to be more of a compelling option. Now, one thing that the iPad Air 2 does have over the Mini 3 is anti-reflective coating. Now, this is something new that Apple have done. So this is not going to be much of a reflective screen, and it's going to be that much easier to view, which is really, really nice. Resolution wise, they've kept things exactly the same. So you've got Retina screens on both of these. 2048 by 1536 in terms of resolution. You've got slight differences in a PPI because of the differences in screen size. So you do have a higher PPI on the Mini 3. However, it's not a huge difference. I don't think you're going to be able to notice a massive difference. It does, however, get the slight edge. Now with the iPad Air 2, because it is a large device, it is going to demand more weight. So you've got 106 grams more on the iPad Air 2 compared to the Mini 3. So the Mini 3 overall definitely more compact, and if you're looking for something a little bit smaller, then that's definitely going to be useful. In terms of the build, both of these have the premium aluminium unibody design, so this is very similar to the previous models. This is something that was quite popular, so there's no need to change that anyway. But you do have the gold versions available now on both here, as well as the space gray and the silver. Gold has been very, very popular on the iPhone, so now they have also got that over onto the iPads, which is nice to see. Now looking at the internals, this is where it becomes interesting. So with the iPad Air 2, as expected, we've got the latest chip, so it's the Apple A8X chip, which is 64-bit, so that's great to see. It's going to be a lot faster and a lot smoother in terms of all your tasks. Now with the iPad Mini 3, they've stuck to the A7 chip, so this is the same as the iPad Mini 2. Now this was quite surprising, so this is the first big change that you've got here. So it's still got last year's specs in terms of the processor. Now that's not going to be a huge deal going forward for, say, the next year, but then if you're looking at longer term, then the iPad Air 2 is definitely going to be the better option because you've got the latest technology on here. You've also got the M8 motion coprocessor versus the M7 motion coprocessor on here. So the M8 motion coprocessor, you've also got the barometer, which is going to be more helpful with those health apps. I'm not sure how much you'll be using the health apps on your tablet, but this is something else that's here. Both of these have 1 GB of RAM. In terms of the different storage versions available, you've got the same here: 16, 64, and 128 gig, and these are both available in Wi-Fi as well as Wi-Fi and cellular versions. So this is the same here. So they've got rid of the 32 gig. They're doing that across the board right now. So they had it with the iPhone 6 and the iPhone 6 Plus. I would have rather they got rid of the 16 gig version, but nevertheless, at least you've got that option of paying the same amount as you would have done in previous years for the 32 gig version, and this time you're going to get the 64 gig versions. Now there's also a difference in terms of cameras. This is another significant difference. So the iPad mini 3 still has a 5 megapixel rear facing camera. The iPad Air 2 has an 8 megapixel rear facing camera, so you've got an advantage here in terms of the resolution. And it also films 720p at 120 frames a second, so you've got slow motion here that you don't have on the iPad mini 3. Now personally speaking, I don't really use my tablet for filming a video or taking pictures, but this is just something that you've got on here. This is a key difference that you've got on these devices. In terms of the front-facing cameras, you've got 1.2 megapixels, capable of filming 720p HD on both. But with the iPad Air 2, you've got a lower aperture, which is going to mean 81% brighter photos and video from your front-facing camera. So for those conference calls and things, that is definitely going to be quite useful. This is something else that they didn't really mention. Now in terms of the operating systems, you've got Apple iOS on both, 8.1, so that's going to come out of the box. This is the same on both of those, but it's going to be working a little bit better and a little bit more faster, no doubt, on the iPad Air 2 compared to the iPad mini 3 because of that A8X chip, whereas you've only got the A7 chip on the iPad mini 3. Now in terms of the additional features that they've included in these devices, so both of these do come with Touch ID. This is absolutely great to see that we've got Touch ID on here. I would have liked to have seen these last year actually on the previous models, but at least we've got them this year. Touch ID works absolutely great on all the other Apple products, and this is now also incorporated with the iPad mini 3 as well as the iPad Air 2. In terms of batteries, they've not specified what the exact size of the batteries are. The battery size on the iPad Air 2 has gone smaller compared to the iPad Air, and that is because it's just 6.1 millimeters thin, which is insanely thin. But in terms of usage, they are saying you're going to get the same amount of usage out of this, up to 10 hours of usage on both devices, so that should be fine. In terms of previous models, they've been absolutely great. Now price wise, you're going to be looking at the base models, so you're going to be looking at roughly about £319 here in the UK for the 16GB model of the iPad mini 3, or roughly about $399. For the iPad Air 2, you're going to be looking at roughly about $499 or £399 here in the UK, and the other versions go up as usual. So you are going to be paying roughly about £80 or $100 more for the iPad Air 2 compared to the iPad mini 3. So there we have it, the iPad Air 2 versus the iPad mini 3. Now both of these are going to be available very soon. You can pre-order them from the 17th of October, and they are going to be available to buy from late October. So from next week, you are going to be able to go and pick these up. I'm sure a lot of you were probably thinking of pre-ordering this or getting one of these straight away, and I thought this is very important to highlight the fact that the iPad mini 3 still has some of last year's internals. I mean, it's the same, practically the same. The only sort of new features that they've got compared to the iPad mini 2 is a Touch ID, and that's pretty much it in terms of hardware features. They've not upped the processor, which I think is a big disappointment, because although in the short term it might not be much of a big deal, but when you're looking at long term, and you know, the tablet, you're not going to be really updating it that much. You're probably going to be keeping it at least for a few years. Then this is going to get outdated quite quickly because it's already a year old in terms of the internals. I think this was quite cheeky of Apple that they didn't really mention this in their presentation. They just sort of flicked over it, and I'm assuming that a lot of you would probably be thinking that the iPad mini 3 is a smaller version of the iPad Air 2. I would personally definitely go for the iPad Air 2 because it's going to last that much longer. What do you think of both devices? Which one would you be going for? Are you really bothered that they've cut back on lots of the internals on the iPad mini 3 and not really done much to it from the iPad mini 2? Well, do drop me a comment below and let me know your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, as always, please do hit that thumbs up button for me. It really does help me out. And why not subscribe to this channel? I've got plenty more content coming up on here. Thanks for watching. This is Saf on Super Saf TV, and I'll see you next time. If you want to see more regular videos like this one, then be sure to hit the subscribe button, which will be below. If you're on a mobile device, it may be somewhere else. If you want to see my previous related video, then hit the link right here. If you want to stay in touch over Facebook, Twitter and Google+, then all of the addresses will be there somewhere, as well as direct links in the description below. Okay, if you're still watching, then that means you've not done one of those things, so you know, yeah. Anyway, I'm just gonna go downstairs. See. Okay, there isn't really a downstairs. Anyway, so yeah.